because I think 2-year-olds are just just so much fun. And somebody's laughing over here, but they are, right? And yes, they can whine and they can get into trouble, and you know what I mean, but it is fun to have a 2-year-old in your life, whether it's pillow fights, whether it's the way they say the new words they're trying to learn, or all of that stuff. Which also reminds me that how many of you have nicknames or family pet names that either your parents wound up getting, or you have for your little siblings? Anybody know, can identify with nicknames? And you know what? Now, if I use your nickname, it doesn't work, right? Why does a nickname work, even as goofy as it is? Even if it's a it's not a real word. It's because of the identity connection, the love connection between the one who's granting it. And do you know, and sometimes we kind of we kind of are embarrassed, if someone hears our nickname, or I don't know, whatever. But do you know that nicknames have their origin in God the Father himself? Because in Revelation, when Jesus is talking to the churches, and each one gets their own evaluation, but he offers a promise to each of the churches, to those that overcome, to those that have ears to hear what the Spirit is saying to the churches. He says, to him that overcomes, I will give this. And one of the churches gets this promise. You're going to get a stone with a name on it that's only known to you and me. God has a personal term of affection, an affectionate personal name that's just him and me, and he's got one for you too. And I just think it's so beautiful. And in so many ways, we look at the relationship God has with us, his people, as it's just that image, right? It's an image of a deeper reality that we can also take and apply in the relationships of our life. And that really is a good launch point for me, because, and I'll just pause on this here, because I don't want to forget this. But, okay, so there's a guy that I've found on YouTube. His name is Doron Kaider, and he is Jewish, lives in Israel, and he is basically the equivalent of a Navy SEAL in the IDF. He's in his 50s. He's now been serving for years and years and years. Basically his life has been in the service. He grew up part of his life in New York with an American family that kind of long-term fostered him, but then when he grew up, he went back to Israel. And anyway, he is a man's man, all right? He's trained to fight terrorists. He encounters evil at the highest levels in this earth. And he was doing a string of podcasts, and he did question and answers on one of his last sessions. And one of the last questions, I think he saved it till last, someone asked him, their own, is it harder to fight terrorists or to homeschool your children? And without a blink, this is a guy with story after story after story of heroics. He says, by far, homeschooling my kids was harder. And I was like, that is why I love this guy. Because, and so I came home and I told that story. I was sitting at the kitchen table, and Elijah, who's been here, he was sitting right across from me, and I told him that. And you should have seen his jaw dropped, and he's like, what? What? He's like, was I that hard of a kid? I said, no. I said, partly because, here's the two, I would say for me, the two biggest reasons are, one, whatever your profession is, let's just you could throw out any highly skilled profession, doctor, physicist or whatever. Just because you can master a body of knowledge and how to apply it in very, very high level ways doesn't mean you're going to be a success at relationships. Do you know what the marriage failure rates for doctors is? Like, I have a son who's an MD, right? Plus. The failure rate of marriages for doctors is like 50% higher than the average, which is already too high. Same thing with soldiers, right? Why is that? Partly because when you're trained to do high-level things, you drill and you drill and you drill and you drill and you master and you build it so deeply into yourself that under pressure, you basically just respond out of your training. It's not primarily a conscious thing. It's like they talk about under stress, you're not going to rise to the level of your hopes in combat. You're going to sink to the level of your training. And that's what these guys do. They are trained so hard, and at the end of the mission, if they make it out, they're done with that mission, okay? With parenting or any relationship, marriage, you can't train enough to master a readiness for every situation because you're dealing with people. Also, and one of my other boys, when you're facing terrorists, you've got the chance of dying when you go into the mission. When you're in marriage or in parenting, you're guaranteed to die every single time. Why? Because it's not my will, but thine be done, God. It's not about me against someone else. It's about me serving someone else. So the third reason I think the question was homeschooling, but I'm just going to broaden it to family relationships. Is because the weight of responsibility is the hardest part of being a parent. Like if you've got younger siblings, you've learned things like changing diapers and setting out meals and cleaning up and running the house. Like when one of my daughter Elsie, when she was born, she was the first of the C-sections that my wife had to have, and my oldest daughter, who's number 3, was 7 years old. My daughter at 7, my firstborn, and I know we might have some firstborn daughters here, she could run the house at 7 years old. Do everything. And my wife could give her some direction from the couch, but at 7, she could bake bread from scratch, she could do all the laundry, she could run the house. All right? So you probably can too if you're any older than that and you've got a younger sibling. But while that helps you prepare for parenthood, there is no preparation for the weight of responsibility that you accept when you become a parent. And especially like for us, like for multiple parents who drive home from the hospital the first time, if they've had the baby in the hospital, that drive home from the hospital is terrifying. You've got this helpless little person in the back of your car, and it's like everybody on the road is coming at you, and you're just like, why? Because you feel so keenly responsible for this helpless new little life that God has entrusted to you. So I say all that to preface, my story. But even before that, so I was the youngest of 3 children. And I had 2 younger cousins, but they weren't really much in my life. And I didn't grow up around any younger children. At the age of 14, I was old enough. I was a good kid. And we had some people that lived in our subdivision that I think my mom worked with or something. And they needed a babysitter. So they asked if I'd babysit. And I said, sure. And I'll tell you what, it was like they abused me. Those children... I think they could see me as, from a mile away. I'm like, here comes one, And it's like the babysitter that winds up getting tied up in the chair, and the children wreak havoc in the house. And, that was me. And I was traumatized. And I never babysat again after that. And they never asked me either. And I thought it ended well, at least. No one was hurt or whatever. But anyway, so children terrified me. I had no experience, and I was the baby by a lot. My older sisters were 6 and 8 years older than me. Like, I was their baby. And so they loved me, having me as a little brother. But children terrified me, and I was very uncomfortable around them. I did have one of my friends, my best friend in high school, his mom would babysit for here and there for little babies or whoever, that would be there when I'd come home from school. That's where I'd go to his house. So we learned to play. I learned to play a little bit with toddlers and stuff, and that was really good. In fact, I just thought of that not that long ago as probably the key experience I had that was favorable with children. But anyway, so fast forward to where our story, started yesterday, or wound up yesterday, with my wife and I engaged, and we're in premarital counseling. And so my wife, she was the second of three and always loved babies. She had younger cousins and friends who had, babies. She wanted to be a mom from like way before, as a young girl. She would look forward to being a mom. So we're at premarital counseling, and the questions are on this worksheet. I fill out this same worksheet as Lori, and one of the questions was, how many children would you like? And I thought, well, I think, 2 would be good. So I put 2. Well, she wanted a big family, so she put 4. Because in you laugh, right? In our culture, 4 was a big family. 5 was really big. I had a little friend when I was a kid, in one of our first home situations. They were Catholic, and they had 5, and I thought that was a big family. It was fun to go there. So anyways, we come back together, we compare our notes, and it was an exercise in just kind of like mentally, where are you at with regard to children and all of that. Well, by the time we got married, we had read a couple of books as part of our counseling, and part of it was to establish our understanding of God's design for marriage and for family and all of those pieces. So at a theological level, and I might have mentioned this yesterday, but if not, there's a theological design in marriage that includes at least 3 key components. One would be companionship. It is not good that the man should be alone, right? So companionship is one of the first, one of the key elements. And depending on which version of which account you're reading, that was like the first, kind of the first observation, I guess, of the commentary on Adam alone in the garden. Comes in chapter 3, I think, or chapter 2. But in chapter 1, it just says that God made man in his image, male and female created he them, and he said, be fruitful and multiply and subdue the earth. So there's a second key tied in, integral to the design of marriage, male and female, is the idea of multiplication and growth and procreation, right? Fill the earth with other people made in the image of God. So childbearing was built in. The other part is dominion. And what I see in dominion, and first of all, if all you are the first family, your family is part of the team that God has put under you to exercise your dominion. And now, in practical terms, what does dominion mean? It means like a job, a task, something to do, some impact to make, something to restore, something to fix, something to cultivate. And part of what I do see as a real problem in our culture is we don't look at people as cultivators. We look at people as consumers. And for all my lifetime, pretty much, there's been this message that there are too many people in the world. That the problem is too many people. People just foul things up. And it's really, this idea of this antagonistic idea toward people, especially children, it's a real thing out there. And to whatever degree you've been spared from that by being in a community or a home where children are valued and appreciated, God bless you. But this world is And because the enemy that was in the garden, hates the image of God, and especially humankind, because they bear that image. And you can just see it's an inordinate hatred for children in our world. The way children are used, abused, and the messaging about children. So worldwide, birth rates are coming down. I think it's something like 75% of the countries in our world today have below replacement value birth rates. And it's almost all been trending that way since the 1970s. So I'm sure there are varieties of ways in which that is all taking place. But it's a global thing. There are countries, South Korea, has a birth rate below 0.7. That means that for every woman, every married couple, they're having less than one child per woman. Like, that's below replacement. You're not going to replace the women and the men. You're going to not even replace one. And when you do that for successive generations, your civilization will collapse, if not die completely. That's where we're at in many places. Japan is 1.3. I've got a Japanese brother-in-law, and he confirmed that statistic. There are only two places in the Western world, two cultures, I'll say, where birth rates are above replacement. One is Israel, particularly among conservatives. They're having children, and I wish I could have found it, but I saw an interview between someone with Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, and he was talking about the connection between their hope in the living God, or in the God of Israel, and their children. Because they are, as I'm sure Nathan knows better than any of us, surrounded by adversaries and enemies. And I remember thinking as a young man, like, I'm not sure I want to bring a child into this world. It's a dangerous place. It's a messed up place. Like, if you ever had a reason to fear for your survival or the survival of your children, it would be Israel. And Benjamin Netanyahu was saying, look, our faith, our hope, we are having children as evidence of our hope. And I was just like, yes. I don't care what the world is saying about children. I don't care. Yes, there are places where the density of human population exceeds the infrastructure. I get that, right? But like, we're not running out of space. And what a human can do, a fully alive human can cultivate and make the area he occupies better than it was before he came on the scene. Like, if I put that picture of my family up there, too many of us I remember at 4, my daughter Jill, some of you know Jill, when we had our 4th child, and I've had other people share this testimony. Like, when you have 3 and you're out in public, like, oh, aren't they cute? But when there's 4, you get this, who do you think you are? Don't you know what it takes to raise a child? Don't you know how much it costs? We were hurt because we went out in public with our beautiful little family of 4 little ones. And all of a sudden now, instead of being this cute little family, we were the bad guys. We were the enemy. And it's because they don't look at people as with potential benefit. And they don't look at people as an asset. And I think I want to just invite us. Do we look at people as the problem in our world, or do we look at people with the potential to be more than we see? To be more than they know? Because that's how God looks at us. He looks at us and sees He's got a destination, a glorious destination in His heart for you and for me. And by His grace and His active engaging in us, we become more than we could ever have been, more than we could dream or think. And so if I put my picture of my family back on the board, I can look at where every one of them makes the world better where they are. I've got a nurse, I've got a car mechanic, I've got roofers, I've got moms, like photographers. Where they go, they make the world a better place. And part of that is because that's how we treated them. we didn't treat them as an inconvenience. We treated them as an asset to my team. And there was a process of that began with me accepting God's valuation of children. And there are many places we could go, but this is where you and I need to start, is by agreeing with God about what he says about children, if parenting is our topic. And a good place to go is Psalm 127. It says, "Behold, children are an inheritance from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is his reward. Like arrows in the hand of a mighty man are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. He shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies in the gate." And I'm just not going to be able to unpack this whole thing, but I will just want to say there are like all kinds of things at work here. But in an essence, when we embrace God's definition of people, of children, that they're a blessing, and that there'd be no blessing that God ever says is mine through Christ that I'd say, "No, God, thanks, I'm good. You can keep that blessing. I'll take all the other ones." Who would ever say that? Right? No, I would. Nobody would, right? But this captures not just the definition, but of God's opinion on children, but the way in which children become an asset, and even in the expansion of God's program. All right? Children as arrows, an arrow is something you can shoot and reach beyond yourself with. And when it talks about that the man with his quiver full of children will not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies at the gate, it speaks to the evidence of a life well invested in others. All right? I don't need to tell you what I think about children. I don't need to explain my theology. Just look. Look at the world. Look at the world that is better because of these people. And that's you guys. The world is a better place because you're here. I am grateful that God gave each of you life. And that has been one of the things that I have deeply longed to communicate to my children, that they are loved. And so, going back to that moment before I became a parent, or when I became a parent, I was terrified. I was grateful for a wife that loved and was comfortable with children, but for me, I was happy with the first baby because she could take care of it. All right, I accepted all that responsibility, but the function of it was hers. With baby number 2, guess what happened with baby number 2? Baby number 2 was colicky. And nothing that worked to comfort baby number 1 worked with baby number 2. So guess what happened? When baby number 2 would cry, and mama couldn't help, guess who got baby number 2? That was me. So I got broke into parenthood with a colicky baby. And some of you know that can be a very, very trying experience. There's just almost nothing you can do to comfort a colicky baby, but help them ride it out. And so that is when I started to when fatherhood really started to dawn on me. But here is at the heart of what I felt like God spoke to me. Because certainly by the time, I had, a growing number of children, I was overwhelmed, right? I had no experience. I didn't have a dad. And I have examples of it. And so as I looked at this growing group of people that were now my children and called me dad, I just had to look and say, God, I don't know what to do, but you are a good father to me. And I felt like God say, okay, now, as I'm a father to you, you go and be that for them. And if you have not had a good dad or a good parent, you are not without access to examples and even a mentor. And I think that's something that's just like the gospel it's one of the blessings of the gospel that no matter what culture we take our message to, and how that would affect their behavior, their relationships, the model for those for our responsibilities in the kingdom is modeled through our relationship with God as Father. And our relationship with Christ and the church. We talked a little bit about that yesterday. Another thing, too, is when we think about, we've been talking a lot about the cross, right? This podium is actually, like, it should be right here because it's the cross. It's what history past has been pointing to, and it's what the future points back to, this cross. And, we've been learning kind of how and why it's the center. And when I think about, okay, for God so loved the world that he did what? He gave his only begotten Son on the cross, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life, right? So we can say with confidence that one of the key purposes for the cross was the saving of mankind, right? Well, there's a verse, and if you want to find this, in John 14, and just like so many little nuggets that, like, I've never heard this preached before, but you're hearing it today. And not just because it's unique. It has become central to who I am as a Christian, but especially as a parent. In verse 30 of John 14, and this is Jesus giving essentially his last words of counsel and guidance to the disciples prior to the cross. And he says, "Hereafter I will not talk much with you, for the prince of this world cometh and has nothing in me. But that the world may know," here it comes, "that I love the Father, and as the Father gave me commandment, even so I do. Arise, let us go from here." So if I had to say, what's the greatest reason? So we've just seen another reason for Jesus obeying and going to the cross. It was so the world would know that he loves not you and me. It's the world would know that he loves the Father. Like, have you ever heard that as, like, do you think the world knows that? Like, I think the world kind of maybe could know that we believe that Jesus loved us. That's why he went to the cross, because that kind of is why. But if I had to say, okay, well, on a hierarchy of reasons, what would be the highest reason that Jesus went to the cross? Because he loved the Father or he loved you and me? I know it's a fake comparison. But I'm going with he loved the Father. All right? And here's why that means something to me as a parent. Because my love, so if I'm called to lay down my life and love my wife as Christ loved me, which is what? Laying down my life, dying to serve her, right? It's really the same for anyone. That I lay down my life for others. There's a limit to how far my love for you or my children can get me. Because you might not be lovable, right? But God, ultimately, as the main reason, the bigger reason why I'm willing to lay down my life for you, even when it seems like it's not worth it, is because I love God. And how can I love God that much? Because I know he first loved me. And this is where it becomes very, very practical, guys. It really does start with just you and me knowing more than anything else, being absolutely certain that God loves me. John said, this same John, said we love him. Why? Say it, because he first loved us. Our capacity to love God, and certainly anybody else, flows from God who initiated it and bestows it upon us, deposits it in us, and becomes the resource, the ultimate, infinite resource for whatever I need to do the will of God. So at the end of the day, as much as I love that family, the reason why I am as committed to this whole enterprise as I am is because I love God. And I have received this as a calling from Him, a holy obligation, a holy partnership with Him. That's why, that's why really why I say parenting isn't for the faint-hearted, because it is such a holy undertaking. Like Jesus said, the worst thing you could possibly do is cause one of these little ones that believes in me to stumble. Like if we really knew how sober it was of a responsibility to be given like a human life, a human soul entrusted to us. In fact, if we go to Colossians 3, and I'm off my notes here, but I guess that's going to have to be okay. In Colossians chapter 3, when Paul is getting practical and writing to us about our relationships, wives to husbands, husbands to wives, fathers to children, there's one thing he says. One thing he says to children. He says, children, obey your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing unto the Lord. How many of you have learned as children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right? Right? You've learned that from whether Ephesians 6 or here, right? And why do parents want you to know that? Like, I think they want you to know that because it makes their life easier, partly. All right? But it's also good for you, right? Because it's the first commandment with a promise, right? That it will go well with you too. But when he writes to the Colossians, he doesn't give that qualifier, and there's one key in this word obey. It's the word to hear under. It's a compound word. It means hupakuo. Right? I think that's the word. Anyway, it means to hear under, literally. So it means to hear with a heart of submission. When the writer of Proverbs would say, my son, give me your heart. That's what it means. It means to listen with an inclined heart. What that means is that it's exhorting children, inviting children, or identifying that the predisposition of a child is to be open to what mom and dad pour in. Now, and you know that I know that I don't always pour in goodness. I have not always poured in goodness into my children. I've yelled at them. I've been selfish, right? It's God is saying to me as a parent, I am calling your child to open their heart to you. What are you going to put in? All right, that should terrify us as parents. If we really comprehend what God is asking of children to do for us. Now, when he says to parents, he says, fathers, provoke not your children to anger, lest they be discouraged. He says only one thing to father. And he points to something that basically it's a negative outcome. He says, don't let this happen to you or your child. Now, most of us know what it's like when we see a child who is broken. Right? It's a tragic thing to see a child whose spirit is utterly crushed and broken. And that's all God is saying to Christian parents here in Colossians. Don't let that happen to your child. And that's where these images become so helpful and so relevant. Because this is a child who's alive, who's dwelling in a home where the climate is marked by grace and love and goodwill and acceptance. This is what naturally flourishes out of children unless we as parents crush it. Do you hear my heart? Like, it is not for the faint-hearted because the price is so high. Like, it's actually too much when we really grapple with it. But just like Nathan's been saying all week, yes, the Christian life is too much. It's too hard. Just like this part of it is as well. And so if not for the goodness and grace and the promise of God, it's too much. But we do well to be honest about this. So I guess I'm just going to say, what does this mean for you and me? I've known that there's been a religious culture. You know, when we talk about what the world thinks about children versus but God, the world can be, you know, the kind of a world that we think of where there's drunkenness, there's abuse, there's violence. But the world can be very, very religious as well. In neither of those descriptions of the world are children valued properly. Sometimes that means people don't want children. Sometimes it means they have children, but they don't value them or respect the responsibility properly. They're a commodity. Religious people can use children just as much as non-religious people or abuse them. And if you've been in a family where you've been hurt, whether it's because of neglect or whether it's because of other ways, I'm inviting you to just be honest about that, and let's bring that to God, because this is your destination here. It's life. It's vitality, and it's a climate of love, acceptance, of goodwill, with an increasing, expanding circle of lives. And if God would be so kind to give you children and give you the vision for what He has wrapped up in those little lives, and what He has for you, not just to nurture them, but to see the team He can build with you. There was a movie. Have any of you seen the movie Unsung Hero? Did somebody see it? Yeah. There was such a good movie, because it's a movie about a family that has become very well known, at least some of the family members. But there's a famous quote in there where it says, your family isn't in the way, your family is the way. And if we would just be willing to accept God's evaluation of children, to see that they are an asset to be cultivated, an asset to be added to our team to multiply the grace that can be in a family, and ultimately will go beyond to accomplish greater and greater things. An army. Somebody talked about that you guys are an army. It is absolutely true. And as a parent, you and I aren't going to aren't raising children. We're raising future adults. And one guy said, you know, that it's good to begin a project with the end in mind. Begin with the end in mind. And it can be very easy to lose sight of the end when the day-to-day things are so challenging or whatever. But it really is helpful when we see that that God has a greater purpose as we invest faithfully, to not despise the day of all things, to be faithful in small things and let Him grow those. So, I think I will close on that. We've got a little bit of extra time maybe. But I want to pray, and then maybe I'll just open up if anybody has any questions, comments, thoughts. I would welcome that. But Father in heaven, I thank you for each life that you, that's here. I thank you for the dreams and the visions and the desires you see for each one of us. And that it's a vision that exceeds what we could dream. And God, what the world despises, you call a blessing. May each of us in this part of our lives, of our worldview, I pray that we would embrace your judgments on the question, on the matter. Lord, that you would help us be faithful. Should you bring any of these young people together in a marriage, should you give any of them a family, God, I pray that you would just inspire their hearts to hope. Because it doesn't matter what's going on in the world or what the world says. Your word is eternal and forever settled in heaven. You are the Amen. I pray that each of them, Lord, would know at the deepest part of their heart that you love them. That you have a special name for them. That you have a special expression and a touch just for them. That their life was not an accident. And Jesus, as you said, that though you were leaving, you were not going to leave us orphaned, that you would come to us. So thank you, God, for being a good father to us, for not leaving us abandoned and fatherless. And then for being willing to give others into our care to nurture new life, to share the life that we've received. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Does anybody have any questions, any comments, anything that wasn't clear, anything that felt wrong or off or needs? Yes, Nathan.
Can I ask, if you were wanting 2 and your wife wanted 4, what caused you to go beyond that and then keep going?
Yeah. So, and again, whatever I say here, I know Kyle is not saying is not going to endorse as the position of Grace Christian Fellowship, okay? But it started with God's definition of children, that they were a blessing. Interestingly, and you probably know this already, Nathan, but when you look at the ceremonial law and the laws about purification and cleansing and things like that, after a woman's menstrual cycle, on a typical 28-day cycle, the Jewish law prescribed 7-day separation after the first week, pretty much. Do you know what happens on day 14? When mom and dad are pretty much ready to she ovulates. Do you know that God built fertility into the law? Seeing those kinds of things reinforces God's opinion about fertility, about child rearing. So to answer your question, to be honest and fair and transparent about it, is we didn't know whether we could have children. So up until, I'm just going to say the last inside of 100 years, the question about should we have any children was kind of not even a question. You kind of accepted it. Culturally, it was accepted as a part of marriage. All right? I think men have known about fertility cycles and things like this for a long, long, long time. But contraception is more of a modern thing, broadly anyways, okay? And so now, like I had one of my children, and to echo why your question is very relevant, growing up in our home, you might assume that our children might have caught our philosophy, all right? Like last year, one of our children said, "Dad, were any of us oops babies?" Because that's kind of partly the question here. And I was like, "Yeah, all of you were." Which is another way of saying, none of you were. So we never assumed that it was our choice to make. Like I told you, I was terrified to be a parent. But when I faced the fact that it went with marriage, the soberness and the fear of God prompted me to say, yes, I'm going to be okay, God, if you give us children. The same fear of God caused me to say, I'm also kind of afraid to tell you no, God. Do you hear my heart? Right? It wasn't a slavish, legalistic view. It was a realization that I have the right to tell God no about something he might want me to say yes about. It's a big deal. Now, that isn't the kind of thing that I'm saying to put anyone under a bondage of fear. It's just, that's how I processed it. And then you start gauging, like, okay, is mama healthy? Are things going okay? You take inventory along the year, along the way. Are we doing okay? And that's kind of how we wound up. We had 11 full-term births. My wife had a few miscarriages. We have 2 children by adoption, too. So we fully embraced that children were a blessing, and we fully enjoyed it and felt that was just kind of our viewpoint, So does that help? Okay. Good question. Anybody else? And I don't want to say that that a couple before God works through the questions, evaluates what they feel are their resources, and in a sanctified way submit their bodies and the potential God might want to do with them to Him, and concludes, for whatever those reasons are, they are choosing, to not be available for that calling. I do not want to make someone feel that they're that they're objectively that it's sinful, because it's a sacred thing. It's a sacred thing to recognize what what we can do with our bodies. Like, we're really not free to do anything with our bodies. Like, I am not my own. I was bought with a price. God wants me to glorify Him in my body with everything. So I'm not free to speak on my own. I'm not free to do whatever I want, even in that category of life. That's what I think God is inviting us to do. So, all right. Cool. Anybody else? Yeah. Oh, sorry.
It's kind of off topic, well, sort of. Is nicknames a blessing in the Bible?
Is nicknames a blessing?
Yeah.
Like how do you mean?
Is it like God's way of basically showing that He's going to be blessing this person?
So do you have an example of a nickname? Because I looked at one that would, and changing the name? Yes, it was usually intended to be a blessing. Although, like, if you're the prophet Hosea, and God says, I want you to name your children, not beloved or not whatever, that might not feel like a blessing, but it's intentional, and it would be redemptive ultimately. But that's how I would say, if God is doing it, it's it would have the intention to be redemptive. So, yeah, did you have a comment on that, Nathan, or anybody? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, I was just like thinking about when he said that, I was thinking about Isaac and how his name was changed to Israel.
Yes,
Yeah, so,
yeah, or Jacob's.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, actually, Hosea's children was named Not My People, right? Like, yeah, I might have an identity crisis if that was my name, like, you know. But yeah, definitely it's a reward. Anybody else? Thank you. Okay, I want one more question. Somebody, give me a question.
What does it mean in that verse when it says for children to honor their parents, but parents shouldn't, what was the word? Provoke their children.
Provoke their children to wrath or anger or discouragement.
Yes.
Essentially, it would be practically. It would be not expecting more out of the child than they're capable and punishing them for it. That'd be a big way. That's an easy way to blow it as a parent. Punish them for something they didn't do, which that is a, if you're a parent, that has probably grieved me deeper than anything else I've ever failed at as a parent, is to bring discipline or punishment, judgment upon one of my children that they weren't guilty of. That can break a spirit. Going too far, implementing a punishment that's too harsh, or what's appropriate. Not loving, like how many children never hear their parents say they love them? That breaks something that should be connecting and healthy in their hearts. Never happens when a child doesn't know they are loved. And I would not be surprised if there are some in this room who have never heard their dads probably say it. Now, the dad would probably think, well, I'm showing it to you every day, but you guys need to hear it. We need to hear that. Jesus needed to hear it. If anybody didn't need to hear it, it'd be Jesus. But on multiple occasions, Jesus, the Son of God, gets an affirming word from the Father. This is my Son whom I love. Like, did he need that? Apparently. Once he says it wasn't for his benefit, it was for others. But I think it did good for him. And how much more do we need it? Those are a couple examples that come to mind. Rejection is a big one. Being rejected, being guilted wrongly, like a lot of times children are used as pawns in broken family situations. So any number of ways that trauma, particularly at the hands of the parent, is affected on the children, especially without forgiveness and restoration. Because parents, we wound our children. It happens. And one of the things my wife wanted me to make sure I said today, as a mom who struggled with anger, a lot of anger that God has healed her from, is just ask the forgiveness of your children as many times as you have to. And thankfully, children are quite resilient, and they do forgive. But a parent that never says they're sorry, never asks forgiveness, that can do it too. The goal here is to help a child experience reality, a reality that doesn't put them at the center, doesn't put their parents at the center. It puts God at the center. And ultimately, it's good for children to know or to grow up in an environment where the ultimate authority is good and is righteous and loving, and that no one is getting away with anything. And we need to, as a parent, realize that. I am accountable here. And it's good for a child to grow up that way. It's also enough, I'm over time, I'm sorry. As we're talking about here, what's the big story? All right? Our value is not that that we're the center of the story. Like, I shouldn't be hurt that I'm not in my mind, that I'm not the primary purpose of the cross, of Jesus going to the cross. Like, to me, what it does, it just cements reality a little deeper. And that's where my mental health is found. It's in conforming to reality. And a child that grows up in the reality of knowing they're loved, and yet there's this God who is light and love, and we didn't even talk about any of that stuff, but a child needs to know that they're loved and that there is light, right? There's a good way of fearing punishment, right? It's a good motivator. Not the best. The best is obeying out of love. But children need to know that that's the reality of the world they're growing up in. And we as parents have the opportunity to model that and nurture and cultivate their hearts in that. Okay, yes, Kyle.
How much of what a person becomes is what takes place between 0 and 12 years old?
How much?
Yeah.
Like, what would I say? Like, what?
Throw out a percentage. Not saying you can't change, but just
I mean, experts typically say there's a lot that happens between like 0 and 5. Like, think of how much they're learning and how much they can memorize before that age. What happens starting, in my observation, it starts at like around 11, where they start processing and applying. It feels like that you're losing a window, an open window to input at around 12. So to me, it's a good opportunity or a good moment to like have a milestone. So I think there's a lot. And that's where, God bless Pastor Gurton back home. Here you go. Another freebie. Pastor Gurton described the 3 phases of parenting, and you can write this down. Control, which is when they're little. Coach, probably around this time, Kyle. And then counselor. And if we are good parents, we'll respect those changing seasons and adapt our parenting to conform to those windows and milestones. So I think, yes, 12 would be a great milestone marker to say, I need to be adapting my interaction with this child. I'm still the parent, but I'm releasing more judgment to them. I'm letting them, because their mind is becoming more critical in terms of what it does with the knowledge they have. Up till then, it's just absorbing. Around that time, they're beginning to process, make their own judgments, and make decisions about how they view the world, whether it's good, bad, and all that stuff. So that's why I would say it is. There's a big window is closing, but it's another opportunity if we'll flex with it to adapt our interface, our relationship with our children. And that's where you as a parent, you find ways in which your child can start to do things that are consistent with maybe their gifts and their interests. You want the Bible, the Proverbs says, "Know thou the state of thy flock." And a good parent is an observer. A good parent is like a good herdsman. Like, he knows that herd. He can watch them. He observes. And before there's a problem, or when it's just little, he sees it. A good parent has to be an observer, especially when you've got a big crew like we had. You can't possibly, it's too much, right? So but you try and look for cues that there's a need there. And you begin to see what they like and transition to. Now I'm at the point now where I'm like a couple of my children are they're kind of like really my best friends. I'm still dad, but we're friends too. And it's really kind of neat. But It doesn't have, okay. As a young person, you start thinking of yourself as an adult. You're designed to, at an age before other parts of you or other parts of us are functioning like adults. And when you start thinking of yourself as an adult, you start expecting to be treated like an adult, don't you? Well, why does it bother you? Why does it grate on us when our mom or our dad calls us out for not operating like an adult? And we get offended at that. Well, here's what's going on. That transition from child to adult doesn't happen in a moment. It doesn't happen because you have a celebration. Neither does the transition from the parent, happen instantly from control to coach or coach to counselor. It's messy. And that tension, I think, it's me, all right? I think God built the transitory nature of that movement into our relationships by design, to require us to depend on Him, to humble ourselves in the face of the inevitable tension that happens. And then, so as an adult, and I'm giving a cue as to where we're going Friday. As an adult, if you're an adult, then it means you're the owner of your actions and responses. Right? I want you to be a fully responsible adult, owning your attitudes, your actions, and your responses. And I am going to incrementally be granting you that respect if I'm your parent, right? Starting well before you're out of the home. But the fact is that it's a gradual kind of thing, and it's always marked with tension. But that's where God wants us to be a family that together, hear this, guys, together we are fighting for the relationships in our home. That's where we're going Friday. And that's where you guys can actually leave here with some real tools about how to really make an impact right where you are today, because you're a part of a team somewhere that's primarily all about relationships. And you know what it's like when those are not functioning well. And sometimes it's because your parents are not adapting very well to who you are and who you're becoming right now. They are treating you like kids too much. And they need to cut you some slack. They need to learn to show you some respect. And I'm not sure, forgive me, I think the moms have a little harder time in that adapting process. I think it's because they are more biologically and emotionally invested in the whole enterprise anyways. And their number one sense of duty as a mom is to protect you from harm. Right? That's what they live for. That helpless baby is utterly dependent on you, Rosie, to protect that child, to protect them. And by the way, husbands, young men, the carefree, free, easygoing, freewheeling girl that you fall in love with is likely going to become a mom, and she's going to change. It's going to happen. It happens to the most independent among you. If you become a mom, something changes. My most freewheeling daughter, by her own confession, has become her mom. Because she's a mom. God wired you to be that way. And that is one of the challenges of this whole thing. You're going to start functioning just the way God made you to, and then He's going to say, okay, you need to change. What? You made me to react this way, God. I know. But now I'm asking you to change. Let it go. Give me room to work. Give them room to be who I've made them to be. And this is where that humility thing is it's everything. So, all right, what else? Okay, one. This is both for you as future parents, but it's also for you to understand your parents now and where things will be in the next few years. The terrible twos were like the dreaded thing for me as a new parent because I heard all about it. And I'd see the meltdowns in the grocery store aisle, and I saw the helpless parents looking like, and knowing how they felt, tied up on that chair by the children, you know what I mean? Totally being controlled. But nobody told me what it would be like to help you guys transition into adulthood. I'm on record, and I'm going on record again today. I would more gladly take colicky quintuplets and call it easier than helping a young adult walk through into adulthood. And again, it's like, why? Like, why is it more terrifying to face homeschooling your children than terrorists? It's because you are more and more aware that you do not have control anymore. And you don't care any less. You even care more if that's even possible. So you guys, I am confident the fact that you're here means your parents care about your souls. And if you guys are the oldest in your families, like they're going to be experiencing something that they're probably not ready for. And that's not going to help them with the adjustment either, by the way. But they're going to have to let you go. And good parents will recognize it's necessary for you guys to make your own decisions if you're fully going to accept and embrace their faith as your own. Like others have said, like God doesn't have any grandchildren, right? Your inheritance as his children is your faith. Because your parents' faith isn't going to take you very far. It may have helped you get to this point. So I don't know why I tell you that so much, just other than the fact of you're at a point where you are on the threshold, if not already crossed into your own life. And it is yours to own. And yes, your parents are probably going to struggle in letting you go. But it's only because they love you and they really don't know what to do or how to do it well. So you can pray for them, but in the process, if you're fighting for those relationships, that might be the greatest gift you can give them. Rather than fighting against it, fighting to be right. So, all right, that's Friday. Thank you. I'm good. Kyle. Okay. Thanks.